Hey, children. I want to talk briefly, kind of wrap up that poverty thing that we've been talking about with a couple of statements, risk factors. We've already covered that in depth, but I just want to give you the conclusion. If poverty is long lasting, it can be harmful to physical, cognitive, and psychosocial well being. So, children and families are affected by those things. Poor children are really more likely to have emotional and behavioral problems, and cognitive performance and school performance suffers because of that. And children on the other end of that spectrum, so you have these poor little kids going through this stuff, and then you have affluent children, and they have, are they free of pressure? No, not necessarily. They don't have the same pressures that a poor child does, but they may face pressure from parents and family to achieve. And it's not infrequent that they're left alone due to high demands on the parents, particularly in their professions. So you make a lot of money, you work a lot. Is what this is saying. This study is saying. Uh, Affluent children, you have to kind of take this. You can't rule this next thing out. Let me tell you what it is, and then let's talk just very briefly about it. Affluent children, and you're not going to believe this, tend to have higher rates of substance abuse, which is very surprising. They also suffer more frequently from anxiety and also depression. Now, here's a way to view that and see if you agree with this. Maybe they do, but also maybe it's because of the affluence. They receive care more frequently than a child from poverty, a teenager that's doing drugs who lives in a depressed situation monetarily. So they don't have the options to get treatment or to be diagnosed or whatever the case is, and an affluent child would. I hope that makes sense. So, yeah, maybe the rates are a little skewed. Um, Now, there are other considerations with this. I'm going to tell you a little story you probably heard. I don't know if you have or not. This is kind of on the same subject. Um, there was a young man, 16-year-old, who got drunk and had a wreck and killed some people and was found not guilty. And the reason he was found not guilty is because got to watch my language here because it angers me. Some judge in a court said that he suffered from affluency. He had afflu, meaning that because, and when he explained it, he said it's because he grew up in an affluent family and they didn't teach him responsibility. They found him not guilty. Well, the guy went out and he got in trouble again, and he and his mom fled to Mexico or somewhere, and they got extradited back to the USA, and I think the kid's in prison now where he should be. But affluence for those didn't work out too well. I don't think you'd find the same thing happen in a teenager that age who did the same thing, coming from a poverty background. He's not going to have a judge side with him. I'm not trying to give you an opinion of something. I'm just talking from past experience, really, when I was a cop. So it's almost like a double standard, I think. And that's not a political view. That's just kind of a reality if you stop and think about it. So you factor those two things in, and then you have to consider the neighborhood background they come from. Poor neighborhoods actually generally have larger numbers of unemployed, and they're less likely to gain social support. So the system doesn't really do much for them. Again, I'm not trying to give you a political view. We're not talking politics here. We're talking about living conditions. So let's wrap that up. Let's leave that behind. If you have questions, email them to me. And I want to talk about something else that's near and dear to my heart. I teach this here at Carolina U. It's called culture. I teach cross-cultural psychology. Some of you may take it. Actually, some of you may be in my summer class for that. Hope you are. Hope to see you there. What is culture? We're going to talk about culture and race / ethnicity. There's kind of a big discussion right now about this that's come about in the last maybe 10 years. So culture, that by definition, a society's or group's total way of life, customs, traditions, beliefs, values, languages, physical products, home types, jobs, clothes, hairstyles, facial hair, religious practices, so on and so forth. These are learned behaviors and beliefs that are passed down to children. What does that mean? That means that it's nurture. It's not nature. You're not born into this world knowing all these things I just named off. These things are taught to you, which makes culture very interesting and sometimes troublesome. What is an ethnic group? It's a group united by ancestry, race, religion, language, national origins. All these contribute to a sense of shared identity. And I won't name off any. Pick your own bunch. Now, there's a question. Boy, I don't know if a question is the right way to put it. There's a discussion related to race and ethnicity. And here's the current answer. What is race? Race is associated with biology. Got that? Biology. Ethnicity is associated with culture. So an ethnic group is based on what your cultural background is. Your race is what you are biologically. Hope that makes sense. It's pretty easy to separate those two. So race would be nature. What are you born into? What is your genetic background? And ethnicity relates to nurture, how you're raised in terms of these things I mentioned earlier, customs, traditions, languages, etc. So kind of a discussion to understand and a definition or two to understand so that you can understand what culture is and what ethnicity is. Now, culture is a weird little duck. Culture constantly changes due to contact with other cultures. If you don't believe it, look at the history of Japan, for example. Look at the history of Japan pre-World War II. Look at today's Japan. You'd think if you're in Tokyo that you're in LA. So what happened? They rubbed elbows with American Western culture and they adopted a lot of the ways that we do things. Prior to our association with Japan after World War II, they were a very collectivist, strict culture. Now, not so much. Some of the influences related to contact, and I think you'll find this pretty real. Email, television, travel, and the biggie, social media. So all these are contributing factors to a culture rubbing elbows with other cultures and then being affected. Does that mean you can't reject a culture's way of doing things? No, it doesn't. But it's an ongoing thing in the world, has been forever and ever. Ethnicity, on the other hand, can be identified by foods, the way members act toward one another, games children play, perceptions of the world. Perception, by definition, is the interpretation of a person's environment. If you had, I'm sure you have, I don't think you could take this course, when you had Intro to Psych, then hopefully your professor covered perception. Very, very, very important thing in psychology. So here you have two things. Cultures that change by contact with others, and ethnicity that's already there. Can it change too? Absolutely. I can change the way you do things. So here, culture and ethnicity are very closely related. Not the nature-nurture thing so much as mostly nurture. And then, finally, a couple of considerations about race. And then next lecture, I'm going to get into some real good psychology, normative and non-normative. Let's end this with race. Some considerations. Number one question, is race a social construct? Oh my goodness gracious. What does that say? That says that your race, supposedly being biological, some say, nah, it's socially constructed. It's your surroundings that make race what it is. That puts it almost in an ethnicity category. And then we have categories other than that, a social category that's a factor in how you're treated or thought of. So that's what we're talking about construct here. Where do you live? What are the employment opportunities? What's the quality of health care? Are you allowed full participation in society? Hey, look back at the history of African Americans, you see that they weren't allowed that. If you are a history buff like me, I had 18 hours of undergrad history, and I love history. Looking at the Tuskegee Airmen, for example, World War II vets, when they came, the African Americans, when they came home, although they had bled and died just like everyone else, they still came back to a society that they were rejected in. So these are social categories, quality of living. And then we have this last little thing that's troublesome, labels, where people tend to overgeneralize and ignore mixed biological inclusion and influence. It's called ethnic gloss. It's a failure to recognize the worth of all people. So there you are. Some interesting stuff that actually has developmental qualities. It actually has, not qualities, I'm sorry, influences. It can affect cognitive and, in some cases, even physical development. So there you have it. See you soon.